Today, we will use English as our conference language. In our program today, we will start with the welcome messages from ICOM Austria's President, Bettina Leidl, and the Weltmuseum's Director, Jonathan Fahim, who will be represented by Dr. Schicki Gruber, the Weltmuseum's curator of South, Southeast Asian and Himalayan collections, to take over for him. Professor Klimburg-Salter has kindly agreed to answer questions from the audience after her lecture. So if you want to ask a question, please put the question into the chat so we could read it from there. Without further ado, I will now pass on the word to ICOM Austria's President, Bettina Leidl.
Ja, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, ich darf Sie sehr herzlich zum heutigen ICOM Palmyra-Gespräch zum Schutz des Kulturerbes in Afghanistan begrüßen. Da heute auch sehr viele internationale Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer dabei sein werden, darf ich in englischer Sprache fortfahren. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I am pleased to welcome you to the ICOM Palmyra-Talk, Protecting Africans' Heritage. I would like to thank Director Jonathan Fahim and Director Schicki Gruber and our colleagues from Weltmuseum Wien for their cooperation and technical support. Furthermore, we are supported by the Austrian Federal Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of International Affairs, who have been partners of ICOM Palmyra-Talk since the beginning, and I would like to express my personal thanks to Dr. Brunner, Magister Kneißl, and Ambassador Brzezinski for their ongoing commitment to this issue. The protection of our cultural common heritage is one of the main tasks of ICOM. So the ICOM Palmyra Talks, we want to raise public awareness of the importance of protecting this heritage and fighting the illegal trade of cultural property. The talks are a forum directed to experts and as well as to the general public to prove up-to-date information on vulnerable cultural heritage, especially in areas of conflicts. In the light of the events of the past few weeks in Afghanistan, ICOM is reminding the public of the painful challenges the Afghan people have faced in recent decades to protect their cultural properties. Criminal organizations have benefited from the sale of looted and illegally excaved African cultural heritage sites. Heritage sites as the famous Buddhas of Bamiyan have been forever destroyed. Many women and men are risking their lives to protect Afghanistan's rich heritage. ICOM has issued a statement requesting that all authorities in Afghanistan continue to respect the integrity of museums, their collections, and heritage sites. Protecting also applies to the cultural heritage professionals who hold tangible and intangible heritage in trust for the Afghan people, without difference in ethnicity, gender, or political opinion. ICOM is currently working closely with its international partners and stakeholders in the region to monitor developments. ICOM's red lists of heritage in danger are an important tool in this regard. They help identify objects from Afghanistan when they are illegally smuggled across borders to offer for sales on the art market. To protect cultural heritage, we need to work together, and everyone can help even from their laptops. Today, many of the illegal transactions of cultural assets take place online through social media or e-commerce platforms. To respond to the situation in Afghanistan, Wikimedia and ICOM have joined forces to mobilize the wiki community and internet users. This is because there is a need to protect Afghanistan cultural heritage, which is threatened by looting and illegal trade. If you have knowledge and access to media files and collections related to Afghan cultural heritage, that are on the red list, you can upload them to Wikimedia Commons and make them visible in a special image gallery. To give us an insight into the invaluable collection of the National Museum of Afghanistan, I have the pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Dr. Deborah Klimburg-Salter. She has kindly offered to give today's lecture on the importance of protecting cultural heritage. As Elke Kellner mentioned, we invited Dr. Fahim, Rahim, Director of the National Museum of Afghanistan in Kabul, to give us a brief statement on the current situation of his museum and the collection, as well as information about other heritage sites and museums. We are very honored to welcome Dr. Rahimi, who is joining us today despite the very difficult situation, and we very much look forward to his statement. Before we continue with the lecture, I'm pleased to pass the floor to Director Christian Schickelgruber to give his welcome words. And I say thank you, and I'm looking forward to our afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Leidl, for passing the word on to me. A heartily welcome to everybody around the world following this program. Lot of thanks to everybody who organized this meeting. I don't want to mention you by name. I try to keep it as short as possible. And of course, a very hearty welcome to Dr. Mohammed Fahim Rahimi, a colleague of mine whom I never met in person before, but I really would love to meet you in Kabul as soon as it's possible, or maybe it's already possible. But at least for the first time, we can meet online. I want to mention that in the Weltmuseum Wien, we opened an exhibition on Afghanistan last week. So everybody who is in Vienna or will come to Vienna till next May, please come visit the museum and see what we try to say about Afghanistan. And with this, already pass on the word.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schickelgruber, with best wishes going out to the Weltmuseum Wien. Thank you again for this wonderful cooperation and all colleagues involved. Thank you. And now may I ask Dr. Fahim Rahimi, the Director of the National Museum of Afghanistan in Kabul, for his statement. Please put your audio on.
Sorry, I muted. Thank you, Dr. Erika. Can you hear me well? And thank you also, Dr. Christian and Dr. Leidl, for your wonderful remarks. And it's very nice to meet you. And good afternoon to you all. I hope you're all having a good day so far. It's also a pleasure for me to listen to Dr. Deborah Klimburg-Salter, who will talk on the importance of Afghanistan cultural heritage, which is special focus on the National Museum of Afghanistan collection, which of course she has been a lot dealing with that. I mean, all of her life, even before war. So it's a pleasure to listen to her. And of course, I would like to thank Dr. Erika and of course Dr. Leidl and colleague Dr. Christian and all other colleagues for organizing this webinar and giving us a chance to talk. Ladies and gentlemen, this is I'm going to read what I have written. So although I'm not good, but I will read it and just it is more kind of organized. This is again time to focus on the cultural heritage of Afghanistan and draw attention for its protection at any level. In Afghanistan, we experience another chapter, a chapter that may drive attention to other issues in Afghanistan than cultural heritage. However, you as Afghanistan cultural heritage experts and lovers can play a significant role to always keep the preservation of cultural heritage of Afghanistan in the agendas. Organizing such programs like today's webinar, exhibitions, or any other sort of program are good tools for that. Dear participants, I firmly believe that the issue of cultural heritage preservation solely remains a humanitarian issue and practice, and never should be linked to the politics and political issues. Cultural heritage is something related to our past and shows the achievement of our ancestors, different beliefs and ideas, our contribution in development of our world, and how we interacted, communicated, and were engaged in the past. Therefore, cultural heritage does not and it cannot be related to any nation or community that is surrounding or owning it right now. If you dig deeper to the history, you can find that more than half of the current nations and communities around the world had a sort of influence or contribution to your cultural heritage. And this is very true for those areas that ancient civilization emerged and developed. And more specifically for Afghanistan that was in the center of this civilization. Thus, the heritage located anywhere in the world, it belongs to all of us and should be concern of all of us as well. No matter what situation and who is controlling it, we should always have our contribution on preserving those heritage. And it is now heritage in Afghanistan that needs more attention. I believe that Dr. Klimburg-Salter will tell you more in details about the importance of Afghanistan cultural heritage, focusing on the National Museum of Afghanistan collection. However, I just want to say that Afghanistan cultural heritage has two main characteristics. One characteristic is that it is very diverse and has influence from every part of the ancient world. And the other characteristic is that a part of the heritage is very indigenous and does not have any influence from any part of the world. These characteristics has been shaped because of geographical location and geographical structure of Afghanistan. Anyway, I'm not supposed to talk about this. Dr. Klimburg-Salter will give you more important introduction about the cultural heritage of Afghanistan and the National Museum of Afghanistan collection. But I just want to emphasize that most of you may worry about Afghanistan cultural heritage and especially about safety of the National Museum of Afghanistan collection. Maybe you all have the question if the National Museum of Afghanistan collection is safe or not. Yes, the National Museum of Afghanistan collection is safe, and we have managed to keep it safe from the looters in the first days of transition. And until now that I'm talking with you, everything in the National Museum of Afghanistan collection is safe. However, we have always had difficulties on the looting of antiquity from the archaeological sites in Afghanistan. This is something that I always needed support, not only in Afghanistan, but also from our colleagues and friends around the world. It is with deep sorrow to tell you that looting of Afghanistan antiquity is happening for more than 4 decades. And no any other country in the world has suffered more than Afghanistan on this. If I go to the sites around Afghanistan and see the holes made by smugglers, or if I see antiquities of Afghanistan on sale in auction houses or shops, this makes me very sad. I hope with your support, we can at least reduce this illegal trade of our antiquity. You all know that destroying an archaeological context is erasing a part of the history. And this is what smugglers do to our sites every day. I also hope that we all work together to return those objects that have been looted from Afghanistan to its rightful owners. And I will be happy to work with you on this issue closely. In the past months, we had started some good work on the restitution of the looted antiquities from Afghanistan. And I hope that we resume our activities and work very soon back. To conclude, I would like to once again.
Shit, I have my old. Oh, I have the Harvard background on, not Palmy on. Shit. Oh my God! Do you know how to change the background?
Sorry, Professor Klimburg, your audio is still on. Please, Dr. Rahimi, please continue.
Can you help me?
It's okay.
Okay. So it's only conclusion. In conclusion, I would like to once again express my gratitude to ICOM Australia and all colleagues, all other colleagues who I cannot remember the names, of course, and also even the institution names. I'm sorry for my bad memory. Who organized this webinar, and looking very much forward to hear from Dr. Klimburg-Salter. I think there are many other good colleagues as well among the audience who can contribute as well with their comments on the importance of Afghanistan cultural heritage at the end of the lecture. And with this, I end my lecture, my statement. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rahimi, for your impressive statement on the current situation in Afghanistan. In these difficult times, we very much appreciate that you're being with us today. All the best to you, to your family, to all the colleagues in Kabul and all Afghanistan. And we may now continue with the lecture of Professor Klimburg-Salter, whom I will shortly introduce. Professor Klimburg-Salter is Project Director at the University of Vienna and Harvard University. She has taught the art history of South, Central, and Southeast Asia, as well as Tibet and the Himalayan regions, as university professor at the University of Vienna's Department of Art History and as guest professor at distinguished universities in Europe, North America, and Asia. She was founding director of CIRDIS, the Center for Interdisciplinary Research and Documentation of Inner and South Asia, at the University of Vienna until 2015, and since 2014, she has been an associate of the Department of South Asian Studies at Harvard University. She is also a member of the Institute of Advanced Studies in Princeton, and in 2020, she received the Austrian Academy of Sciences Wilhelm Hertel Prize for her scholarly achievements in the field of Asian art history. Since 2003, she has worked with UNESCO projects related to heritage preservation in Afghanistan. Since 2005, she has directed the Kabul Museum project, a capacity building and curatorial training project in collaboration with the National Museum of Afghanistan in Kabul and Sirdis. Professor Klimburg-Salter, a very warm welcome to you and many thanks for being with us today. Please start your lecture if you will.
In the bottom toolbar. Yeah, I have share screen and I have the national.
We still have, I think, some technical problems, but Professor Klimburg-Salter will shortly be with us with her presentation. I think it will just be a few seconds or any minute that we continue.
I have something totally irrelevant here. Oh God, I disconnected this. Wait.
Professor Klimburg-Salter will present to us.
I'm trying to get myself connected here.
Please stay with us for a few minutes, for a short time, until we have resolved the technical problems, and Professor Klimburg-Salter will present her lecture about the important collections of the National Museum of Afghanistan in Kabul. I'm sure we will shortly manage to solve those technical issues. And I think we are about to begin very shortly. We see the presentation, Professor Klimburg-Salter. We have it on our screen already. Just continue to the starting point. There we are.
Okay. I very much apologize for my technical stupidity, which messed everything up this morning. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we hear you very well. We see.
Oh, excellent. So greetings to everybody, and I apologize for this delay. Thank you, Frau Kellner, for the very kind introduction. And thank you, Fahim, for taking the time to speak with us from Kabul and for your very important message. I should say that all of, or many of the points which you were so which you so eloquently expressed are also included in my PowerPoint, and so I'll make my part shorter. But the basic message is, I think, as we all have understood, that Director Rahimi, as well as all of the staff, as far as I know, at least all of the staff that I know of the Kabul Museum, remains dedicated to the preserving the culture of Afghanistan, the cultural heritage of Afghanistan, and therefore continuing to preserve the collections of the Kabul Museum and to pursue its many goals, some of which I'll try to discuss today in the PowerPoint. A very brief historical introduction just to place the present moment within the broader historical context. The Kabul Museum recently, or not too long ago, celebrated its 100th anniversary. This is unfortunately a winter scene, as you can see, but usually, as all public buildings in Afghanistan, the museum is set in beautiful gardens, which were always the pride of the gardening staff. The Kabul Museum, from its inception, set the international tone, which Director Rahimi spoke about. That is, the museum was, from its inception, connected with many countries of Europe and abroad, and particularly, as was the case in the 1920s, in Afghanistan, there was a very deep connection to France. This is taken actually from, these pictures are taken from an Iranian guidebook to Kabul, which was written in French and Dari, as you see here. So the National Museum, as well as the Museum of the Beaux-Arts, both were very much influenced by the cultural traditions of France. The earliest directors of the Kabul Museum were both educated abroad in Paris and Lausanne, and so were French speaking. And much of the archaeology was under the agreement between the French government and the government of Afghanistan, with the exception of much of the Islamic archaeology in Ghazni, which later became a major interest of Italian institutions. And these connections to the national governments of France and Italy have remained until the present day. What you see here is the tomb of the Sabuktigan, a famous Ghaznavid ruler in Ghazni. In recent years, this whole area was developed with a museum under the aegis of the Kabul the National Museum in Kabul. And unfortunately, that museum, as the National Museum in Afghanistan, suffered badly during the last 40 years, and those precious collections, as the precious collections of the Kabul Museum, were also looted, damaged, and in some cases totally destroyed. This was the Kabul Museum as it was at the beginning of the First Republic, of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, and the first time that I, under the aegis of UNESCO and my colleague, then graduate student, Susie Novotny, visited the museum. It was for me, who had spent 8 very happy years at the University of Kabul and the Kabul Museum. And as for the residents of Kabul, it was a terrible shock to see. Can you see when I use the pointer? This is the Kabul Museum. These are public buildings. This whole area, which had been filled with trees and gardens, was completely devastated during the war. What you see here is the results of a chance bombing in the early 90s of the Kabul Museum during the fighting, during the fighting of the Civil War. The entire second floor was damaged, and with it, many of the precious collections. The greatest loss was the Islamic collections, which were on the second floor, as well as many murals from the Buddhist period and the Islamic period, which had been cemented into the walls. As you can see here, this is on the first floor. Many of the most precious collections of the museum were completely damaged. And here we see the numismatic collection. These, you won't, only a numismatist would appreciate these wonderful drawers, but these were dedicated by the Austrian government, bought and dedicated by the Austrian government. And the famous collection of the numismatic collection of the Kabul Museum, which fortunately was not completely, but largely looted, was inventoried during a multi-year stay in the 50s in the Kabul Museum by Robert Goebbels, an Austrian numismatist, member of the Kunsthistorisches Museum. And this tradition of numismatic research and the support of the colleagues in the Kabul Museum to train numismatists continues until the present day under Michael Alram, Director Rahimi, also on 2 occasions, I believe, during our training programs, visited these collections in the Kunsthistorisches Museum. The pottery collections, of course, in an archaeological museum are of tremendous importance. And here you see the future director, not yet the director of the Kabul Museum, Mr. Masudi, in 1996, transferring what they were able to transfer out of the museum in order to save it after the bombing. As Masudi tells the story, these were terrible 2 years because of the bad fighting in that area. The museum staff was unable to reach the museum, but there was, after the first looting, there was no further looting, and fortunately much of the collection could be saved. Despite the tragic conditions at the museum staff, I can't say were optimistic, but they were determined to rebuild their museum, to reinstall their collections, and continue to protect the heritage of the nation. And here you see here written and Dari and translated into English, was written and has become their motto: a nation stays alive when its culture stays alive. This gives you a little sense of how, from the beginning, from the beginning, as I pointed out 100 years ago, the National Heritage and the museum was involved with many foreign nations and participated in the contemporary international movements of its day. And as a result, these international connections have continued. And this gives you just a brief indication at the beginning of the reconstruction of just 3 of the nations, or 2 of the different nations, and UNESCO, who contributed to the rebuilding and reconstruction of the museum. UNESCO has been an important feature or an important aspect of the evolution of the Kabul Museum. In the 60s, the UNESCO financed a large-scale inventory and reinstallation of the Kabul Museum collections, which is what characterized the museum until its destruction until the 90s. At that time, it was considered one of the most important museums in Asia. The exhibition rooms were installed up to what was considered the latest fashion at that day. And the entire museum was inventoried according to an international system that was used by UNESCO. This international system of inventory was then reapplied after the museum began to reinstall itself, reconstitute itself. And what you see here is the list of the inventory efforts under UNESCO agencies that attempted to re-inventory the Kabul Museum collections after their complete inventory was destroyed by fire in the museum. So any of you who are museum professionals know that this is a museum's worst nightmare, to lose its entire archive and inventory. and much of the next 20 years actually has been devoted to reconstituting this inventory. So this picture just is to remind you of the, for one thing, how many archaeological sites there are in Afghanistan. And I should say that this map has been greatly increased in the last 20 years because of the activities of the Archaeological Institute of Afghanistan and the Kabul Museum, again, in collaboration with UNESCO and French missions. And this gives you an idea of the tremendous complexity, the ethnic complexity of Afghanistan. There are 14 official languages, according to the present constitution. And it was the goal of both the first museum director, Ali Ahmad Khozad, a famous Afghan scholar, and Motamedi, the second director, who was for many decades the director, as well as then in the modern period, the contemporary period after the reestablishment of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, the directors Masudi and the current director Rahimi, to not only respect this ethnic, linguistic, and religious complexity and long history of their country, but also to attempt to demonstrate that all of these varied factors contributed to the rich historical and artistic heritage of the country. So this just gives you some idea of how much work there needed to be done. The museum was literally rebuilt from the inside. It was fortunately a solid stone building, originally built as a palace at the end of the 19th century. And you can see this is myself during our second mission in 2005, financed as the first mission in 2004 by UNESCO. This is the UNESCO representative in Kabul at the time, Nagaoka, and the conservationist at the museum, and we are all attempting to inventory the confiscated objects, the objects confiscated by the customs, re-inventory them because they, or not re-inventory them, but inventory them for the first time because they were not part of the museum. At that time, this was the only table in the museum, and there was one chair. But somehow the museum managed to pursue all of their various functions. This is what we were inventorying. This is from what later revealed to be the very extensive and important site of Kharvar in Logar. And here you see us again with our one table and one chair and all various members of the staff. I'm talking to Dr. Masudi in the right-hand screen. And here you see the really heartbreaking sight of the fragments of the museum. You saw two slides which showed them. The museum staff, this is on the ground floor, the museum staff meticulously separated, then sorted, then tried to reconstruct thousands of fragments. As you see here, every room on the ground floor was covered with cloths like this and fragments of sculptures. Below you see the conservation department attempting to reconstitute the sculptures. This process, by the way, was supported by several different museums and governments, including the Italian and Italian government, Ismail, and the British Museum, which continues actually until, or had continued, or still continues, I guess, today. One of the most important processes, as I mentioned to you, was the re-inventory of objects that had been in the museum, but whose inventory catalogs had been missing. This is myself and Susie Novotny, members of the conservation staff, who were in charge of emptying one after another, taking each object out of the storage where it had been hidden for 24 years during the Civil War, and miraculously preserved, as one of the conservators said, conserved by Afghan hands. The only room in the museum at that time which was functioning was the director's office. This was I used to call it the command station. This was Dr. Masoudi, who always in a calm and dignified manner somehow managed to negotiate between all these various needs, the different national governments, UNESCO, and his staff at that time of 76 at the National Museum. One of the many really tragic losses was of the last kafir sculptures, that is, these famous wooden sculptures of pre-Islamic, obviously, of indigenous, of local deities associated with the ancient religion of the Nuristan people. This was another contribution of the reconstruction that you see on the right-hand table is another contribution of the Austrian government. Max Klimburg in the 70s did the first thorough field research on the art of the Nuristan people and enhancing also the collections. And then in 2005, he oversaw a mission to the Kabul Museum together with an Austrian conservation specialist, where they were able to reconstitute the sculptures and provide the setting there in this room for the inauguration of the first president of Afghanistan, Ahmad Karzai, which was symbolically and importantly, this inauguration ceremony placed in the Kabul Museum to demonstrate the connection of the new government and the people of Afghanistan to its cultural heritage. The museum itself was reconstituted, rebuilt in a record time. And here again, you see now the motto of the museum, "A nation stays alive when its culture stays alive," now inscribed in marble at the entrance to the museum. The storerooms were reconstituted. Not the store, there were storerooms also, but the exhibition rooms, the amount of objects that could be exhibited at that time were limited, but nonetheless, they were installed. And extremely important were the remains of an Islamic chapel that had been cemented into the wall, but on the ground floor and miraculously survived. So again, just to show you this, every single point you see on this map is an archaeological site, and much of it was, well, something from every site was stored and exhibited in the Kabul Museum. The most famous of the archaeological finds of the second to last period was the famous gold hoard of Telya Tepe, which means golden tepe, the golden mound, that was circulating around the world for many years and has now been returned by the people of China. It was the last site. This fantastic collection was believed during the war to have been lost, but it had been very carefully hidden by the Kabul Museum staff. And during the general re-inventory, it was reopened and re-inventoried for the first time. and it was announced to the world that this fantastic treasure had been saved. The treasure, aside from its extraordinary quality, reflects a central feature of the culture of Afghanistan, which is its role as the crossroads of Eurasia, actually. And there are examples of techniques and iconography in this large hoard that stretch from the Western Mediterranean, the steppe cultures, northern Afghanistan, to China. We will now look briefly, if you look at the group of the trade route at the top, these are the cultures of the Hindu Kush. Or first we'll look at Begram. So another site, a famous site where a hoard was found by the French delegations is the site of Begram. This is another great treasure that again reflects the fact that the country was literally a crossroads of civilizations. This treasure was apparently, well, it was either a treasure or it might have been a very exclusive storehouse where objects were sold. But again, there were objects that came from India, this ivory, from Alexandria in Egypt, also from Egypt, and other artifacts as far east as China. Aspects of hand lacquer were also found. An extremely important site in Afghanistan is the site of Hada, which was excavated up until the Civil War, which tragically destroyed much of the archaeological site and the storeroom. But fortunately, a large amount of objects from the French excavations that began in the 1920s were in the Kabul Museum and have been saved. The site dates from about the 2nd century with this very Mediterranean influenced limestone up through into the 7th century, where the famous Buddhist art of Hada is an important feature of the Museum of Afghanistan. This is the area of around Begram, where that treasure is from. This is the only Buddhist site that uses stone, a feature of Gandharan art in Pakistan, and a cause for some confusion occasionally from the general public. But the style of the stone art of Kapisa is a distinctive feature of the Buddhist art of Afghanistan. And then there are the great collections of the Hindu Kush. This is Bamiyan before the Buddhas were destroyed at the beginning of the present millennium. But the collections, fortunately, were preserved in the Kabul Museum. And I just quickly show you some of the marvelous 3/4 life-size painted clay sculptures from Fundukistan. This is some of the details just to show you how complex it is. Thanks to the combination in the Kabul Museum always of research as well as addressing the general public. Susie Novotny was Kogler at the time, was able to do a master's thesis at the University of Vienna on this material, which is famous for its extraordinary aesthetic, as well as the very complex technique. These are 3/4 life-size sculptures. These are one of the painted remains of the side chapel of a side valley from Kakrak, also dated to the 8th century. And here is a detail. The Japanese team has been studying the painting technique and the pigments, which is quite extraordinary. and they were able to discover that the earliest oil painting ever used any place in the world was not in Italy, as previously thought, but in the Hindu Kush. I had always believed at this time, 2008, that we would discover that actually it was first invented someplace else, perhaps in Central Asia and China. But to date, this remains still the earliest oil painting in the world, and is one example of the extraordinary developments of technology that characterized the last pre-Islamic phase of Afghanistan, the Shahi kingdoms, from the 7th to the 10th century. Now, much of the excavated objects are associated with Buddhism, but there were many religions that were represented in Afghanistan, beginning with the famous Zoroastrian religion, which is associated with northern Afghanistan. But also Hindu cults were important from the 7th to the 10th century. And this is a sun god, a series of marble Hindu sculptures. Marble is used exclusively in Afghanistan during the pre-Islamic period for Hindu sculptures, but then was continued in the same area with marvelous aesthetic results in the early Ghaznavid palaces in Ghazni. Important recent excavations have taken place. Well, there have always been excavations going on around Kabul to the degree that the intense population allows, but very important excavations have recently been conducted by the Afghan archaeologists of our Paiman at Tepe Narenj and Koli Tut, which have extended the chronology of the Buddhist centers of Afghanistan right into the 10th century, and have demonstrated that there was a direct interface between the last Buddhist and Hindu dynasties and the first or the earliest Islamic indigenous dynasties, that is the Ghaznavids ruling from Ghazni, because Buddhist Ghaznavid coins were found in all of these sites, but there was no sign of destruction. And we can only imagine that this was at that time the coin of the realm, and people who were visiting the site simply dropped them as we do today. One of the real disasters of the Civil War was the loss of the Islamic collections, as I mentioned, on the upper floor of the museum. These very precious wall paintings from the 11th century were cemented into the wall and were simply bombarded. But there are new finds that are
I think we have a short slip in connection. I hope the connection resumes again shortly. We'll try to get the connection to Professor Klimburg-Salter up again. Please stay with us for a few seconds. Professor Klimburg-Salter, can you hear us? Please turn on your camera. We seem to have lost connection. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we're working to re-establish the connection to Professor Klimburg-Salter. There seems to be a technical problem on her side. Please stay with us for another minute. If any questions that are arising in the audience, you have got the possibility to type them into the chat, so we can forward them to Professor Klimburg-Salter, and she agreed to answer some of the questions after her lecture. So please use the possibility to post some questions while we try to establish the connection to Professor Klimburg-Salter again. Thank you for staying with us. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, dear participants, dear ladies and gentlemen, there seems to be a persistent problem in the connection. We can't really get hold on Professor Klimburg-Salter via the Zoom talk and can't reach her on the phone at the moment. So we're trying to get that resetted and get her online again. But maybe there's a bigger communication problem between Europe and America. So we'll try to get that fixed, and we'll continue to wait for another 2 or 3 minutes if it's possible to continue and keep you informed on that. Thank you for staying with us, and we'll be with you shortly. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really disappointed to have to end this lecture that abruptly. That seems to be a bigger communication issue between Europe and America. We lost the internet connection to Professor Klimburg-Salter, and we are also not able to reach her via a phone connection. So there seems to be a communication issue that is not on our side to being solved. So I'm very sorry. We heard Professor Klimburg-Salter's lecture about the importance of heritage protection and the rich collections of the National Museum of Afghanistan in Kabul. We heard about some of the projects she initiated with CIRDIS and the University of Vienna, and trying to cooperate and rebuild museums like the Kabul museums. The collection of the Kabul museums seems to be safe now. Thank you so much for the statement of Dr. Rahimi, the current director of the National Museum of Afghanistan. Thank you so much for being with us. We dearly hope that this safe condition continues to be this way, and we ask all concerned parties to support this mission and this cause to keep the Afghan heritage safe. I hope that projects like the ones from Professor Klimburg-Salter can be a model for projects how international organizations and museums can cooperate to support the protection of heritage and to support the protection of Afghan heritage especially. So I'm very sorry that we have to stop our transmission. We are not able to get a connection again. And we hope to maybe issue the presentation on the YouTube channel later. Let me check with the technical team on these issues. Thank you for staying with us. Thank you for your interest in the ICOM Palmyra-Talk. And we're very much looking forward to having you again. And thank you for being with us again. Thank you, all the best.
Thank you, Dr. Elka.
Yes, I'm very sorry.
but anyway, I mean, I know there are always these technical problems.
Yes, there seems to be really no connection at all to get hold of Professor Klimburg-Salter again. So, but let's hope that we can stay in touch. And if you have any issues that ICOM Austria or the International Museum Organization of ICOM can assist you with, please don't hesitate to contact us. We're very happy to do so. I think also the Weltmuseum Wien can be our partner in that, and has also offered to support the National Museum of Afghanistan. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us anytime.
Thank you so much. Thank you also Dr. Christian and Dr. Leidl for all of you and all other colleagues who are, thank you. Have a very good evening.
Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was nice to meet you.
Same here.
And it's interesting that the line between Vienna and Kabul is much more stable than between Vienna and Boston.
Well, we are a very developed country.
Yeah, that's the proof today.
I actually got the whole connection of, I mean, I'm at home and I mean, ask all other colleagues to not work on YouTube or other things so that I have all.
Okay. All the power is with you. Might I ask you a maybe difficult question? How is the situation for foreigners to visit Kabul in these days?
Well, we do not have flights, so you cannot come here.
Okay.
There are no flights well, I mean, there are some flights, but not commercial flights.
Yeah.
Actually, they stopped for more than 2 months now. And today just, I read the news that even the PIA, which was an airline from Pakistan, they also stopped their flights here. So I wish there were flights and you could come here, but no flights now. Maybe in the next month it will get better.
Hopefully,
and, we have the flights again. Anyway, so it's very nice to meet you and talk to you, and I wish you a very good evening. So hope you enjoy also.
Yeah, good evening to Kabul. It must be quite late by now. We only got
It's getting dark.
4 p.m. It's getting dark.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm at home. I'm not anywhere else, so I do not have to worry.
Nee. Okay, dann sage ich auch auf Wiedersehen.
Danke.
Bye.
Danke.
Danke.